the important thing about the Prachand is that the development cycle wasn't the usual painful, self-defeating kind of development cycle we usually see with aircraft and helicopter programs in different parts of the world. But a lot of people have been grumbling about why only 15. It's your Indian helicopter. You should be spending more money and inducting them in big numbers. I was one of those people grumbling as well. I'll be very honest with you. I was also thinking, what the hell? It's a beautiful helicopter. It's ready. Its weapons trials are completed. We should be, showing faith in an Indian helicopter rather than spending money on foreign mal. But I had a conversation with Air Chief Marshal Fali Major, the only helicopter pilot to have made it to the position of Chief of Air Staff. And he said it's actually a blessing in disguise. HAL's website, is unspeakable. It's a Sarkari relic. It probably updated some decades ago. It's a terrible website. Let's not, mince our words. Sarkarism runs in its blood.
Hello and welcome to the 27th episode of Inner Defense. Hi Shiv, how are you?
Everything good? The dust is settling?
Yeah.
Back in the game now.
Yeah. You love wildlife, don't you? I was saw you anchoring a couple of hours ago. You were covering the story from Bengaluru where a couple ordered something from Amazon and they found a snake in the box. What struck me was I think you are perhaps the only anchor and only journalist who was wondering about the snake. Was it rescued safely and was it put out in the wild?
So I actually checked. I called my friends in the forest department in Bengaluru and they said yes, it was released safely. So the snake is safe. No, but I feel very strongly about such things, as you know, Dave. Defense is my first love, but animals and wildlife is right up there with defense. So because I had to care about the welfare of the snake.
Yeah, because my editor who was sitting in front of me also overheard that, and then she recalled how when she was in a different company, because the two of you I think had worked together initially in her career, but when she was in a different company, used to message her, fact checking that particular website's photos, saying this is not that particular snake, this is
animals,
that snake.
So I do that for weapons, aircraft, and animals. Yes, all three things.
In case our listeners don't know, Shiv is quite known for being on social media, very active and pointing out when websites put out the wrong picture of fighter jet,
People
which
hate
happens
me for it,
quite often.
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, he just sends it to our, like me or one of my, our editors, so that we can correct it. But for the other,
but we rarely get it wrong.
We rarely get it wrong. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Right. So this week we'll talk about the Light Combat Helicopter Program of India. The helicopter is called Prachand. It was inducted in 2021, 22, if I'm not wrong. There are currently 15 already in service, 10 with the Indian Air Force, 5 with the Army. And this week, the Defense Ministry has cleared another purchase of a mega order of 156, 90 for the Indian Army and 66 for the Air Force. Before we get into the program and why do both Air Force and armies have their own divisions of combat helicopters, and about the history of Prachand, what is it chopper all about, and how does it compare to the Boeing Apache that we also operate. First, a very silly question, if you may. What is with the light in name? So you have Tejas, which is a light combat aircraft. You have this Prachand helicopter, which is a light combat helicopter. Why light? Even the Dhruv, I think, which is like a sort of the base platform of which Prachand is based. I think it's called a light utility helicopter. So what is with the word light? What does it signify?
These are kind of vague terms as far as the lay viewer or lay listener is concerned. But instead of illustrating it in numbers, let me illustrate it in terms of the helicopters that most people are familiar with. Now, the Mi-17, the helicopter you see everywhere, the one that ferries the Prime Minister around, the one that you see, the grey iconic sort of backbone helicopter that the Air Force uses. Now that is a medium helicopter. That's a medium lift helicopter. So think about the size of that helicopter. That's a medium helicopter. Anything smaller than that, and the Dhruv helicopter, which you correctly identified, is called the Advanced Light Helicopter. Now, a light helicopter is basically of a tonnage that is roughly about 2/3 of a medium. Now, the light combat helicopter, the one that we're going to be talking about in today's episode, not very many people know that the light combat helicopter is basically like a laterally flattened Dhruv.
Okay.
It's the same helicopter. They took the same airframe. They modified the fuselage and the airframe basically, and made it from a sort of conventional helicopter where you have side by side seating to an attack configuration where you have tandem seating, where you're sitting, one the pilots are sitting one behind the other in order to make the helicopter thinner, in order to make it a smaller target and more maneuverable and things like that. So that's the only reason why it's called the light combat helicopter. So there's really no other reason. Of course, apart from the all-up weight of the helicopter, there are also considerations in terms of the amount of weapons it can carry, etc. And we'll get into comparisons between the Prachand and the Apache in a bit, but yeah, that's basically what it is. Yeah. Heavy lift helicopters go into a much higher category of ability. Okay. Those are helicopters like the Sea Stallion, the Chinook, which we have. Those are heavy lift helicopters.
Right. So that our listeners and viewers and even me to an extent can better understand Prachand and Apache and etc. and what we'll talk about on this episode. What's the role of a combat helicopter in the first place? Is it sort of like a fighter jet where it can go off to on a mission and bomb a particular place and come back, or is it more to do with sort of support? It's more of a supporting arm for your ground troops. Yeah. Because I think we briefly discussed this in one of our previous episodes, not in detail though. So what does a combat helicopter do in the first place, and why do militaries need them?
So right off the bat, I'm very keen that our listeners and viewers understand this, because this is an important thing, especially in the context of what we've seen happen in Ukraine, which came as a reminder. But attack helicopters are battlefield assets. They are not, in the conventional sense, elements of air power. When we think of air power, we think of strategic effects, fighter aircraft, bombers, things that fly at very high altitude and have weapons ranges which are way beyond visual range and things like that. An attack helicopter flies low. Its primary mission is something called close air support. So you're absolutely right when you say that these don't fly sort of lone wolf independent missions. They're flying in conjunction with troops on the ground or a unit positioned on the ground. They do have the ability to cause damage at a standoff range. They've got weapons and missiles and radars that are capable of looking far ahead, but their mission is very much linked to troops or battle groups that are happening on the ground. So close air support is your bread and butter mission for an attack helicopter. Within close air support, there are various kinds of missions. There could be anti-tank, anti-armor missions, having to target vehicle convoys, having to target high-value establishments that may be behind a mountain, that kind of thing, where rather than send a fighter aircraft, which is a much more difficult proposition, you have a helicopter which takes off much closer, is able to quote unquote look behind that mountain and then deploy just enough weaponry or a missile to be able to tackle that particular target. So that's what an attack helicopter is really about. So don't think of even though in the Indian Air Force is operating attack helicopters, and we'll get into that quandary in also just a bit, Dev. I'm sure you're going to ask me about that. But it's very much a battlefield asset linked to troops on the ground. The army controls what these attack helicopters actually do, and they are basically seen like as an extension of the boots on the ground. It's not an independent asset. It's basically causing an effect desired by the warfighters who are on the ground. It's not an independent element.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a tank or an artillery gun, but in the air. Giving support for your combat troops. Right. So let's talk about Prachand before we get into the history of Prachand, as in the program itself, which again, like most modern defense, the equipment that's being made in India, the idea goes back again to Kargil, but that's a separate story altogether. Let's talk about Prachand, the helicopter, the technical aspects of it. What is it? How cool do you think? How good do you think it is? How does it compare to the Boeing Apaches that we have? 22 in number, if I'm not wrong. Sorry, 22 with the Air Force and 6 with the Army. Yeah. And do you think with this new order that we're about to place, and which I think these helicopters will be delivered in the next 4 to 5 years, do you think India will no longer have to depend on Western or foreign equipment when it comes to helicopters, attack helicopters?
Okay, so let's first talk about what the Prachand is, and then we'll get into the comparisons, which is a completely separate exercise. Now, the Prachand actually stands out, in India's made in India arsenal because it was developed quite quickly. The Dhruv helicopter, the ALH Dhruv helicopter that HAL had made, which is now your mainstay, light helicopter, took a while to design and manufacture. There were teething troubles, there were lots of issues, which are totally normal and routine in any aircraft development. That took a while. But once the Dhruv was proven, once it was in service, it was decided that the Dhruv, all of its systems, all of its subsystems, its cockpit, its rotor, its transmission system, everything is really good. It's very, very rugged. It's being used by the military in different terrains. So instead of creating a brand new attack helicopter from the ground up, why don't we just modify this? That was the thought process within the HAL. The idea had actually come from the army. The army had said, you've got this great helicopter, we're already using it, we've already created infrastructure for this. Why don't we try and modify this into an attack helicopter? Modifying the fuselage turned out to be a slightly surprisingly easy task. Now, I'm not saying it was easy. It was obviously hugely complicated. It was an engineering task. But it turned out to be relatively elementary because the Dhruv is a very robust design, and it was amenable to the kinds of modifications that the army wanted. So within a matter of a few years, your basic design and your basic construction of an attack helicopter derived from the Dhruv helicopter was on paper, and a few years later it was prototype, a few years later it was flying, and now it's in service. So the important thing about the Prachand is that the development cycle wasn't the usual painful, self-defeating kind of development cycle we usually see with aircraft and helicopter programs in different parts of the world. And Dev, the important thing, I'm saying Dev because we're talking about Dhruv and Dev, so I'm going to make that mistake often in this. But Dev, the important thing about the Prachand, and it was always called the light combat helicopter, remember, it was only called a Prachand starting 2022, is that the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force's requirements from an attack helicopter are incredibly different from any other country's requirements.
Okay.
They said that we need our attack helicopter to not just be a helicopter that sits in our desert sectors like Jodhpur or Bikaner or Jaisalmer. We need this same helicopter, the same damn thing, to not only be able to perform at sea level in our desert sectors in extreme heat, but we want the same helicopter without any modifications to be capable of operating in Ladakh, in super high altitudes, in Siachen, on the glacier, etc. Which is, if you think about it, an incredible ask. Because there is no army, literally no army, not the United States, not China, no army that asks for this kind of thing. And they can't be blamed for not asking because they do not have these kinds of disparate frontier scenarios. India is unique in that respect in the world in having operational frontiers that literally stretch from desert, scorching hot desert, to minus 40 degrees glaciers in the north, with similar kinds of threats on both sides. You've got Pakistan, you've got China, you've got other kinds of threats. So this was a crazy ask, and it is to the credit of HAL and the Army and the Air Force that they delivered it. They got it done. They did their work. They did their homework. They purpose-built the Prachand to be a helicopter that would, in a single configuration, in a single variant, be the same helicopter that could be deployed in either of these places without any changes. Nobody has managed to do that in the world, and I don't think Indian aerospace engineers get enough credit for that kind of thing. It is simply not said enough. So that is the Prachand. It's taken its time. 15 helicopters, like you said, were inducted a couple of years ago into the Army and the Air Force. But a lot of people have been grumbling about why only 15. It's your Indian helicopter. You should be spending more money and inducting them in big numbers. I was one of those people grumbling as well. I'll be very honest with you. I was also thinking, what the hell? It's a beautiful helicopter. It's ready. Its weapons trials are completed. We should be, showing faith in an Indian helicopter rather than spending money on foreign mal. I had a conversation with Air Chief Marshal Fali Major, the only helicopter pilot
Yes.
to have made it to the position of Chief of Air Staff, and he said it's actually a blessing in disguise. These delays, he said it's easy to be emotional about delays in procurements of Indian weapons, but it's actually a blessing in disguise in this sense that now that the Indian government has signaled that it wants to order 156 of these helicopters. Now there is a kind of clarity,
yes.
a 1 year or 2 year clarity in terms of when full rate production has to begin and deliveries have to begin, and which means that now HAL has the very, very valuable opportunity of conducting all sorts of improvements to the helicopter and making it the best possible product it can before it enters that kind of full rate production and delivery to the Army and the Air Force. 90 for the Army and 66 for the Air Force. As far as these numbers are concerned, I am actually hearing that number may actually go up to 200. So it's a win-win situation as far as the Prachand is concerned. To your second question about how it compares. Now, look, first of all, it would be unfair to compare a helicopter like the Prachand, which has just entered service. It has just entered. It's a baby in the world of attack helicopters. Literally an infant. It's had 2 years of operational service in Ladakh and Jodhpur as part of that, a part of its first unit. The Apache is 40 plus years old. The Apache has been in service for decades together. I think 40 is wrong, but whatever the number is, the number of years Apaches have been in service is enormous across variants, across decades, across operators like Israel, etc., across different kinds of upgrades that have happened. So the Apache is a legend when it comes to attack helicopters. So the comparison, while not something that anyone should avoid or anything. Technically, you can compare any two things, but all I'm saying is it's not fair yet to compare it. But since you asked the question, let us compare it, because there is simply no comparison right now. There is no comparison. Now, there is no scenario where you will have two attack helicopters going against each other.
Yeah.
So that's not how you would compare. You would compare them in terms of how efficiently they can conduct a mission. What is the range of their weapons? What is the efficacy of their sensors? Are their sensors able to, look beyond the horizon or look behind a mountain, staying away from range while attacking, a target of the enemy? The other way to compare would be, what is its survivability? If it comes under attack in hostile airspace, what kind of survivability? If it is hit by a missile or by ground fire, can it still land safely? These are the criteria by which you actually judge, attack helicopters. Now, there are many parameters here where I would dare say the Prachand would actually compare quite favorably with the Apache in terms of survivability, handling qualities, etc. I'm sure it's actually as good a helicopter. But when it comes to the brains and the weapons of the helicopter, there is a long way to go, and there is nothing to feel ashamed of. This is not some emotional thing ki yaar, we can't compare with that. The Americans have had not only a sort of generational ecosystem building these machines, but they've had wars in which they've torture tested these machines in actual combat. So, we haven't had that. You mentioned Kargil. Something like the Prachand would actually have been a game changer in Kargil, which we'll get into. The war is just celebrating its 25th anniversary, in fact. But to long answer short is that there is no comparison just yet. In terms of some of the basics of flying qualities and pilot experience, I'm sure the Prachand would compare favorably if we are to compare at all. But in terms of its sensors, its electronics, its navigation attack system, its targeting system, its onboard computers, the kind of data fusion that pilots receive in the cockpit that enables them to almost be in a kind of video game like scenario when they're hunting or deploying their weapons against targets. There's no comparison just yet. This is not to say that the Prachand will not reach that position, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I like your last point because I think you explained that quite beautifully well during the Tejas episode, where you said that developing a fuselage, strapping on an engine is just one part of the job. You also have to build the avionics, the electronics that fly the plane or the helicopter. The brain. Because I think it happened with the Dhruv as well. Dhruv initially was using, I think, some foreign supplied systems that were used to fly the helicopter. But now I think later on they developed something that was indigenous. So let's briefly talk about the inception of this program itself, because while you say that the move from Dhruv to Prachand, by the way, Dhruv also has another helicopter called Rudra. So I think before we get into the Kargil wala point, if you can spare a couple of minutes on Rudra and how is it different from Prachand?
So look, the Rudra was basically a risk mitigation exercise. I'll explain what that means. Now, you have the Dhruv helicopter, which is your bread and butter light helicopter, which is used for a variety of missions. It's used for air transport. It's used for humanitarian relief. It's used for cargo. It's used for delivering troops behind enemy lines. It's used for slithering troops down in combat scenarios. That is your Dhruv helicopter. It's the helicopter you see most often along with the Mi-17 in any picture you see of the Army, Navy, Air Force. The Dhruv is the most visible helicopter you will see there. It's a utility helicopter, which means it will do what you want it to do. It depends on what kind of mission you're putting it in. So there are Dhruvs that also conduct anti-submarine operations, that they have sonars for the Navy, etc. So that is the Dhruv. It's a bit of a Swiss Army knife. It can do many different things depending on what you want to do with it. Now, in the process of converting the Dhruv into the Prachand, which was an engineering exercise, the Army and the Air Force also realized that, look, yes, we'd love the Prachand, and it's going to be a fabulous helicopter, and that's going to be a true blue attack helicopter, with a slimmer profile, to give it a much more difficult head-on, silhouette in terms of being survivable in targeting, etc. They said the Dhruv itself, by the way the Dhruv exists right now without any changes, could also make a fabulous combat helicopter. It could make a very good attack helicopter. We don't need all helicopters to have that tandem seat configuration of a conventional attack helicopter. It doesn't have to be pilots sitting one behind the other. You can just take the normal Dhruv, strap on a good targeting and attack system and a weapons package, and convert it into a very, very capable attack helicopter. Now, the difference, of course, is that this is the Dhruv without that slim silhouette of an attack helicopter. It's the old chunky Dhruv that has the weapons. But that doesn't mean it's not a good weapon. And I think if the proof of the pudding is in the eating, the fact that the Indian Army and the Air Force operate upwards of 100 Rudra helicopters, which is the armed version of the Dhruv, is testament to how good that helicopter is. So it basically was a way in which the army was saying, look, we love the Dhruv anyway. So while we're waiting for the Prachand, please give us just weaponized Dhruvs themselves, because we do have missions where we may not need dedicated attack helicopters to go out and do those missions. There might be other kinds of missions where we can use Dhruvs, where where the threat to a helicopter may not be as large that we need to send in an actual attack helicopter. And that's the reason why you've got a huge number of Rudras in service right now. Very, very successful product.
Right. So the inception. So while you say that the converting the Dhruv into Prachand happened fairly quickly, but don't you feel that the idea of having your own Indian-made attack helicopter, that itself took a while? Because I think the Prachand development began somewhere in 2000. I forgot the time number. I think 2005, 2006. By which, if you compare to other such similar equipment programs, I think it is quite fast. From 2005 to 2021, you have it in service. But the idea of having your own, is it that? And what I've read is Kargil was the point where the military felt the need for having attack helicopters, and like you said, it could have been a game changer. So tell us, what was it about Kargil where the military realized, we should have this and we should make it on our own? And was it that before that we never really felt the need to have attack helicopters because our wars weren't fought in a manner where we would have needed them.
So India has operated attack helicopters even before Kargil. The Mi-35/28 helicopters are, attack helicopters which are even now currently in service, and those are of a heavier category than the Prachand and the Apache. But like so many things in this country, Kargil turned out to be a kind of wake up call, a kind of it basically shook the entire military by its shoulders and taught them many lessons in terms of what they should have, how they need to use it, what kind of structures they need to have, mission and weapons doctrines, etc. And one of the lessons of Kargil that was learnt was that if you had the ability to use light combat helicopters in a mountain scenario, it could have been a game changer, because there were many positions that were taken by the Pakistan army which were on low hills and low mountains, where you wouldn't need to indulge in the circuitous and complicated exercise which the Air Force finally had to do, which was get laser designators from Israel, strap them onto your Mirages, get different kinds of laser guided munitions from Israel, and then use them to bomb Tiger Hill, etc.
Yes.
They did it successfully, but it was not an easy exercise. It was a complicated exercise. If you had attack helicopters, now the natural question that you would ask is, if we had Mi-35 attack helicopters, why didn't we use them? Because those are big fat beasts that can't operate at high altitude. Enter Prachand. So that it's incredible how there's such an incredible cause and effect cycle that happens in Indian defense procurement. It wasn't until Kargil that the Army and the Air Force realized that you might need to use an attack helicopter at high altitude, not just in the deserts where you've based your Mi-35 helicopters, or in Chandigarh or wherever, or in the plains where you're thinking that these helicopters are only going to be used against a theorized tank attack by Pakistan. Suddenly Kargil happened, and they said, imagine if we had light, reasonably armed helicopters that were able to operate at these crazy high altitudes, of Kargil, Mashko, Dras, and all these places where the air is very thin, and helicopters that are capable of carrying a reasonable amount of ammunition to be able to actually soften those Pakistani positions. We would be in a much better position. The war wouldn't have lasted 50 days; it would have lasted a shorter time. So that was one of those those eureka moments for the army, and that's one of the reasons why the Dhruv program, which was by then on kind of even keel, spawned the Prachand. So and if you look at it now, once the light combat helicopter was sort of almost about to enter service, the first thing that the Army and Air Force did was send 2 Prachands to Ladakh. Because you had the Eastern Ladakh standoff with China that had begun in 2020. By 2021 or early, I think it was 2021, there were 2 Prachands that were sent to Ladakh. They said, it doesn't matter that these are, technology demonstrators or prototypes or whatever it is. Let's have them there. Let's open them up to an actual operational scenario where you may not have enough maintenance crews, etc. And let's see what these birds can do. And I can tell you, because I know the people who were operating them, they loved it. The experience of operating an Indian machine vis-a-vis a foreign machine, which is by its nature alien, where parts come from abroad for most part, where the know-how is not yours. There are various aspects of it that are not shared with you because it's not your because of intellectual property and many other restrictions. This is yours. You can pick up the phone, call HAL, they'll send a team. You can do whatever you want with that helicopter. And they were able to really stretch its wings in a big way in Ladakh and learn things about it that they didn't know before. They actually, a small anecdote, they found that the lift performance of the LCH was actually like of a higher degree than they had imagined it would on paper or during computer simulated tests, which meant that it was actually even better configured for high altitude operations. So it was a really good surprise that the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army got when these helicopters came to Ladakh. So yeah, there's no comparison at all. Having an Indian helicopter is a game changer beyond just the combat experience.
Right. Right. We'll go into some controversial territories now when it comes to attack helicopters, and why you have both the Army and the Air Force operating them, but after a quick break.
This groupism, did it start just before the T20 World Cup? It started 6 months ago when
Babar
ODI
left
World
the
Cup.
role.
You knew this was happening.
I agree.
Then why will you take that captaincy? That is what I'm saying. If I know
Power hungry.
that is what you don't have any power, brother. You in the history of cricket for Pakistan, you will be a villain. You are power hungry. You took the captaincy and you have sunk Pakistan cricket and new lower.
I think the best thing that can happen with this is that the way Indian team changed their mold after 2021 and 2022 loss. They kept the same personnel, bar a few, and then they said we are just going to change our approach completely.
But that cannot happen in Pakistan.
I would completely agree with what Saurabh said. Now is not the time for Babar to say, okay, I give up.
No.
If you
But that is ODI. He's talking about ODI.
No.
Champions Trophy.
Yes,
They don't
Champions
play
Trophy.
any
We're
T20.
talking about you don't play in T20s. And you know what? This India mold can't be applied in Pakistan. Why? Because what happens in India? So we have a board BCI, we have a president. There is a term. He serves a term. Okay. Now BCI president term does not collide with that chief selector's term or captain's term.
And
Even if
also the president's term of the country.
Yes.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing India's light combat helicopter program. The name for the helicopter is Prachand. And this week, the Defense Ministry has cleared an order for 156 helicopters. 90 of those will go to the Indian Army. 66 of those will go to the Air Force. For someone like me, the question is, kyun? I get why the Navy has its own aviation wing, because naval pilots, whether they are helicopter pilots or fighter pilots, they operate overseas, they operate with ships, they operate on ships. So you would need to have a naval background, naval training for that. Though I'm guessing they are trained by the Air Force. The Army has its own aviation wing, which operates apart from the Prachands, various other helicopters. If you were to look at the inventory of the Indian Air Force and Indian Army helicopters, you'd see several overlaps. They quite often have the same piece of equipment. The reason I say Q is because I would imagine that even if the Army were to call in an Air Force Prachand, when they have enough numbers, it would do the exact same job that Army has its own Prachands. Army Prachand would be doing. There's nothing that the Air Force would be doing Air Force Prachand would be doing separate from what an Army Prachand would be doing. So, if you're a regular follower of Friend Defense, Shiv has actually answered this question previously in an episode of Jointness. And if you are paying close attention to his earlier the first question that we spoke about on this episode, you'd know what his answer is going to be, but I'll still let him say it. But on a serious note, I also want to talk about how did this divide happen in the first place? When was it decided that the Air Force also will operate helicopters, the Army will also operate helicopters, especially combat helicopters? And are we too far down the road for us to course correct now?
This is a painful topic that carries with it all the warts and symptoms of what afflicts a military, and what stops it from operating at its optimum and best. And I don't think there is a more telling example of the distance that we still need to go for even the smallest of collaborations between our militaries. Now, in the most conventional sense, the Indian military, through its evolution and through its progress, basically evolved in such a way that the Air Force was seen as the force that will take care of everything that flies. Helicopters, aircraft, fighters, gliders, trainers, no matter what it is. If it leaves the ground, it's air power, and therefore it's the Air Force. Oh. Now, the way things have shifted in terms of wars, in terms of how wars have fought, has obviously shown that air power is a very, very unique and specific thing. Air power is strategic. Air power is a power, is the application of air assets for strategic effects, largely strategic effects, where you're using fighter aircraft, you're using bombers, you're using drones in our current scenario, using satellites, to create effects that are maybe visible to you or maybe near to what you're happening in the tactical battlefield, but it has a strategic effect on the enemy because you're using something that is overwhelming. It comes from above. It comes from a place that is difficult to detect. It comes from somewhere far away. So there is a kind of expansive, larger than life sense of what air power is. But when you talk about an attack helicopter which flies low, and like I said in my initial answer, it's flying in conjunction with ground troops. It is linked in every sense to what the ground troops want to achieve, which is why their primary mission is called close air support. So the mission is not even an independent thing. It's a close air support of your ground troops. Therefore, attack helicopters are not air power assets. They are battlefield assets, which in any evolved military would be with the boots on the ground. In our case, the land force, of course, is the army. Now, my Air Force friends take great exception to my opinion on this, and they have various arguments in terms of why not, and you can't ignore how things have been in the past, etc. But I think we've come too far as a country, to have the luxury of giving everyone a space that's based on the past and based on sentimentalism and based on tiny petty turf wars. And that's what this is. It's a tiny and petty turf war. The Air Force sees it, and I'm not talking about any specific air chief or any specific person in service, but in general, the culture in the Air Force has been that, look, if assault helicopters go entirely to the army, they lose a piece of what they had control over. It's like office politics. Yeah. It's really like that. And, I'm not trying to minimize it or, I'm not trying to dumb it down. But if you boil the bullshit away, that's what it actually comes down to. Because in evolved countries of the world, countries that have used attack helicopters in operations in a very serious way, whether it is the United States, whether it is whether it is China, whether it is Russia, those attack helicopters are battlefield assets that are linked to your ground forces. They are not part of your Air Force. The Air Force shouldn't be getting bogged down in battlefield assets which are tactical in nature and linked to what your troops on the ground are actually doing. You've got to have a wider vision as an Air Force. Now, because of this turf war, because of the emotions attached to jointness, because of this sense of, jointness means me having to give up some of the things that I was responsible for. Yeah. And believe me, this isn't the only example. There are various other examples, including space and stuff like that. And if we get into that, believe me, you will be crying tears of blood here. And we'll save an episode for that. The pain of jointness in India. But it's resulted in a situation where you have something as ridiculous as 22 Apaches for the Air Force and 6 Apaches for the Army. With the Prachand, it's 90 for the Army, 66 for the Air Force. Opposite skew, which is ridiculous. I've met international journalists who say, we love the Indian military because it's like a museum. You've got every type. It's a free for all. There are no rules. सबके पास ड्रोन है, इसको भी फाइटर चाहिए, उसको भी बॉम्बर चाहिए, सबको मिल भी जाता है, बजट भी है, माल मिल जाता है सबको. So it's a bit of a circus. Now, the only problem is it's not a issue to joke about. Yeah. We've got real enemies, we've got real operational scenarios, we've got a war-like situation on our northern border with China, and therefore, honing this down and getting it right is difficult. And just to close that thought, if you can't get something as simple as your attack helicopter, the command and control of your attack helicopter right, what other big things are out there that are yet to be detected or out in the public eye is the scary part. That's all I will say about that.
Right. And I guess what underlines how difficult it is to mend the situation is that the last person who tried to, General Bipin Rawat, as the Chief of Defence Staff, he ran into quite the controversy when, I think, speaking to you or your colleague Gaurav Sawant, he said that he sees
the famous support arm, yes,
Air Force as a support arm. Though if you listen to Shiv's answer right now very closely, you would kind of get where he was coming from, that what he meant was that the Air Force supports the operation of a war and doesn't necessarily fight the wars anymore, because it's not like the World War II
It was
where
a,
you
it
have
was a.
dogfights.
I mean, honestly, it was a very ill-advised choice of words.
Yeah.
You know, in an atmosphere where the Air Force was already suspicious of what the government was trying to do in terms of theaterization, I think General Bipin Rawat, bless his soul, were those words were they exuded a kind of arrogance.
Yeah.
And they seem to diminish the Air Force. The Air Force is not a support arm. Hello. There can be wars that the Air Force can fight alone and win, where the Army doesn't even get involved. If you use air power, you may not even need the Army.
Yeah.
So there's no question of this support arm nonsense. I think that was a very flippant comment by General Bipin Rawat, and it was something that didn't go down well, and it did some damage in the system. Believe me.
Yeah. So poor choice of words, and I'm guessing it definitely should not have been said in public for sure.
Yeah.
Right. As we bring this episode to a close, let's talk about HAL. I think we'll devote a separate episode for this company altogether, because I think Shiv has some nice flowery language for this company when we talk about its past. But I want to talk about the rosy future.
Yeah.
Do you think that it is now finally its moment to shine, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited? Because you have the LCA, Tejas, very good aircraft, close to 200, either in service or on order. You now have the Prachand. Not now, you've had it for a while, but now you have an order for 156, and you're saying it could also go up to 200.
Yeah.
And if you want to bring in space, you also have the what was known as GSLV Mark III, which is now named LVM Mark III, the Launch Vehicle Mark III, which took Chandrayaan 3 to the moon, and which will take our future astronauts to space as part of the Gaganyaan mission. So all three pretty cool tech, very advanced stuff, very, very good stuff, and everyone is happy.
Yeah.
ISRO is happy with the GSLV, the Air Force is happy with the Tejas, and both Air Force and Army are happy with the Prachand. So do you think that if we forget the company's past, now is it the time for this company to really shine and be like, guys, we are owning it and we'll do everything that you need to know?
See, HAL, there is no doubt about one thing. HAL is a great company. There are no two ways about it. What HAL has achieved is great for a country like India. Now, the problem is HAL has spent most of its life until just a few years ago, in a near total monopoly with the Indian military. Okay, it didn't care much about exports. That came much later, but it had a captive market that the rest of the global market was drooling for, and no one else to supply except HAL. So HAL kind of got fat on that, on a kind of lifestyle where it didn't need to work for orders and contracts, and that kind of stymied innovation and supplying a better product. There were quality control issues, and this led to a kind of adversarial relationship between customer and supplier, which is not necessarily always a good thing. And we've discussed this in a previous episode as well. The reason why I believe, and I agree with you entirely, Dev, that this is HAL's moment to shine is because now HAL is in a position where it doesn't have a choice but to compete for orders. It has to compete for orders. Those orders are not going to drop into its lap now. The Prachand order that's coming up is fabulous. The LCA order is fabulous. But beyond that, the horizon is looking very competitive. You've got the Tatas and Airbus already building the C295, which means private sector aerospace and aerostructure construction is becoming a deliverable, which means you have your first private sector aircraft manufacturing ecosystem, not nuts and bolts, not parts, not some subsystems, etc. Full aircraft are going to be built by Tata in Vadodara and Hyderabad, right? So HAL now is forced. It doesn't like that, but it's now forced into a situation where excellence is an imperative. It will have to become more professional. It will have to become more excellent. Its products will have to be better. It will have to innovate better. And there's no reason to believe they won't. HAL actually has many projects right now which are hugely promising. They've got the drone fighter teaming system.
Yes.
I've forgotten what it's called. Like it's called the Cat Thunder, I think, or the Cat Hunter, which was displayed at one of the
Yes.
Aero Indias. They've got a supersonic trainer, which looks very promising. They've got all kinds of mini UCAVs, unmanned combat air vehicles. They've got a highly expanded drone division that's building some very innovative new products in collaboration with the IITs and some startups, which is very good. And this is the kind of thing that HAL has never done before. But now they're under pressure, and this is good pressure. Nobody should say HAL deserves it, and finally they have competition. HAL is indispensable in India's military supply ecosystem. They have to be there, and they will get a lot of orders, based on this competition. But they need to demonstrate that they are capable of
Yes.
being in that competitive space. And there are no two bigger projects in front of them than the LCA, Mark 1A, the deliveries. They're going to be about 200 aircraft. That's huge. Can they get up to that production rate that the Air Force needs, to earn whatever comes next? Then you've got the Prachand for the Army and the Air Force. Then you've got the light utility helicopter, which will come online shortly thereafter, and that's going to be even bigger, Dave, because those helicopters will replace up to 400 to 500 cheetahs and chetaks and all your the smallest helicopters you see. Those are all going to be replaced by this Indian helicopter. So they've got their work cut out, and the competition from the private sector has basically made the luxury and the elbow room for delays, cost overruns, excuses, having a bad attitude, arrogance, etc. All that is out of the window now. Now it has to be really, really professional corporate culture. Deadlines have to be met, budgets have to be obeyed, and that kind of thing. And I think it's like 2 thumbs up for HAL. They will deliver. They will definitely meet that challenge.
Right. One final thought from you on this point. Don't you also think that it's time to for this company to rebrand, not like rename it, but I was looking at their website before coming in. It's ugly. The aspect ratios of the photos on display are all screwed up.
Yeah.
The logo is, frankly, very, very ugly. Not nice to look at. I'm not sure how the offices must be because, I've never been there. But the website essentially has that old Sarkari feel to it, right? Okay, no one's even bothered to look at it. I didn't even navigate it. I don't even know if the data on it is correct, updated, etc., etc. Don't you think it's time for this company to rebrand? You're sending rockets to space, building fighter jets. Just like have a cutting edge
I
website.
hear you, Dave, and I agree with you that the way things look, these small things matter.
Yes.
There would be those who would argue that website ka kya karna hai? The conversations that happen offline. Nobody's coming to our website and seeing an aircraft and then ordering it. Everyone knows what we do. So website ka kya karna? But countries like the United States and Russia and Israel, etc., have proven over decades that marketing,
Yes.
Image, public relations is hugely important in terms of your reputation and how you are perceived as a company. And you're right, HAL's website, is unspeakable. It's a Sarkari relic. It probably updated some decades ago. It's a terrible website. Let's not mince our words on that. I haven't visited their offices recently, but that's a different aspect. But even their stalls at air shows,
Yes.
etc., are nothing to write home about. They're quite underwhelming. But this is also this is also a cultural thing. Let's never forget that HAL is a PSU. It's a government-owned public sector undertaking under the Ministry of Defense. So Sarkarism runs in its blood. And harnessing and embracing things like social media and the internet and good photography and good video imagery, which we are now seeing the forces do in a
Yes.
really good way.
Exactly.
That hasn't infiltrated into HAL just yet. They're still suspicious of these new things, because remember that they've been comfortable for so long without these bells and whistles. They are suspicious about a world where these things have become a necessity. So it's going to take a while. Hopefully, in fits and starts, you will suddenly see a really flashy HAL brochure, where the aspect ratio of photographs is fine. I hear you on that. It's something that really, really annoys me. But especially because HAL has fabulous fabulous photographers. You know, people like Deb Rana, who in my opinion is one of the finest photographers in the country. The HAL has access to people like that, and they still have terrible photography, out there. Gagan Singh, great people, and they don't use them enough. So yeah, I hear you. This is something that they need to devote some time to. The way people you perceive you, will have a footprint on how you take things forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm guessing that the opening up of the competition gate is perhaps going to play a huge role in sending them on that path. Thanks, Shiv. Once again, great chat. Had lots of fun, lots of information about India's attack helicopter program. Thanks to our viewers and listeners as always. And also thanks to our lovely producer, Anna Priyadarshini. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.